Hi, I'm Lisa Bedford and I'm the Survival Mom. Today I wanted to talk with you about a topic that I know has been on the minds of lots and lots of moms and health-minded individuals around the country and around the world. And that is, how safe is canned food and should it be included in your food storage pantry? Well, that is actually a tough question to answer because every family is different, every individual is different. But I would like to walk you through some information about canned food in general and then give you some guidelines for making those decisions for yourself. First of all, the advantage that canned food has and the reason that it has almost always been included in food storage plans is because it is contained in a long-lasting container. And if you've ever stored something in glass or in flimsy plastic bags or in cardboard, you know that pests can chew their way through, containers can break, but not so much with canned food. They really are meant to last. A second advantage is that it's very easy to stock up on canned anything. Canned ravioli, chicken, tuna. It is just sitting at the grocery store and just waiting for you to come and fill up your cart. And that's an advantage because I understand completely that many Americans do not have easy access to typical food storage foods such as freeze-dried ingredients. So a trip to Kroger's, a trip to Safeway is a lot of times the quickest way to build up that pantry. A third advantage is that it has a long shelf life. And we now know that the shelf life of canned food can be years past the date that is stamped on the package. So those are some advantages that canned goods have. And, you can't really argue with any of those. However, canned food has a very big disadvantage, and that is that most canned foods are lined with a compound that contains bisphenol A, otherwise known as BPA. And this compound has been in widespread use since the 1960s. And it's found in so many different products. I even discovered that it has been used to line the inside of water supply lines. And in fact, 93% of Americans have traces of BPA in their urine at any given time. BPA is even in the paper receipts that we get at the grocery store, as well as in water bottles and up until recently in baby bottles. So clearly, BPA is in a lot more products than we realize. BPA has been found to cause issues with fertility and perhaps causing hyperactivity and depression in young children. And I would say that, if you're given a choice, yes, who wouldn't want to have food products that were safe and had not been stored in anything connected with BPA? But that's easier said than done because it is so widespread. I have about 7 tips, though, that I want to pass along to you that will help you decide if you want to store canned food at all, and if so, how much, and what specific items should you have on your shelves. So, tip number 1 is to assess your current use of canned food. You may actually be surprised to discover that you hardly ever use something in a can. I know I was thinking about that today, and I will go through an entire week or two and never even use a can opener. And it's not so much that everything we eat is organic or everything that we eat is whole foods, but I just don't make that many things that require food in a can. So that's up to you. Starting today, why don't you just track your cooking and track the food that your family eats and see how often do I reach for a can opener? How often do I eat or do I serve something that contains canned food? Once you know that, then you can determine if you want to continue buying those foods, and if so, do you want to have those as a backup? So I think that a role that canned food can play in a pantry is as a backup. Now, you may have heard me talk about the beauty of canned beans. Right now, I probably have 100 or more cans of canned beans, but I want to tell you why. All right. The reason that I've stocked up on canned beans is that, first of all, I like to use beans in cooking. I believe in their nutrients and I believe in their fiber. However, I also know that there can be a time when it isn't so easy to soak beans overnight or for several hours in water. What if water is at a premium? What if I just don't have time to throw a meal together and there's no way I can soak beans or boil them on the stove? And so cooking beans in this particular example is something that I might not be able to do very easily in the future. And that's why I've chosen to kind of zero in on beans in my pantry, canned beans, as well as, of course, the dry versions. So you might take a look at what you use and ask yourself, is this something that, number one, my family really needs? Okay? And if you say, all things considered, I don't really need to buy canned peaches or canned pineapple. I think we would do fine without those products. Maybe I can pick up some freeze-dried versions. Okay, that would be great. But it all comes down to you and your assessment. I've given you my assessment and why I have stocked up on canned beans. And that's perfectly logical, and I will use those as needed. Another tip is to increase the garden size in your home and increase the varieties of things you grow. So if you have decided we're off of canned vegetables, we're off of canned fruit, then where is that going to come from? You really do need to have a nice variety of produce in your everyday diet. We don't want to go back to the days of scurvy and rickets. Okay, so be thinking to yourself, how practical is it for me to grow apricots? How practical is it for me to grow enough green beans that could get us through a few months worth? That's a lot of growing, and it's a lot of home canning. I'm just putting that out there, because once you say no more canned produce, well, then you have to decide, where's it going to come from. Now, I have purchased a lot of produce from Shelf Reliance, their Thrive brand, because of all the nutrients that process does retain in fruits and vegetables. But I know that some people may not have the access to that, but that is one option that you have. Another tip is to look at the canned foods that you use and just decide, I'm going to make it from scratch. No more buying canned pasta sauce, for example, with some homemade canned or home canned tomatoes, with some tomato powder, with some herbs and some garlic, whatever you like to put in your own marinara sauce. Just decide, I'm going to make it from scratch from now on, and do away with the canned goods. And of course, that will involve making large batches. It will involve home canning. It's going to involve more work. But I guess, some of this just boils down to individual decisions. I mean, is that the route to go? Or do you want to pick up those cans or those jars of cans of pasta sauce when they're on sale for 99 cents? It really is just, I think it's a trade-off in a lot of ways. And that goes back to my suggestion about using certain canned things as a backup. So I do have some cans of pasta sauce. Not that I'm so proud of having canned pasta sauce, but I know that there are times when, even now, when life gets so hectic, much less at a time when there may be a collapse, there may be some devastating event. And I just don't have time to put on my old, Italian mama apron and stand over a hot stove, stirring and simmering for 2 hours. Some of that just isn't very realistic. And so when whatever it is we decide to store when it comes to food, it really does take a dose of realism, being just realistic about future scenarios, and then what's acceptable. And are there times when it's okay to open a can of chicken noodle soup? Another tip I have for you is just to increase your home dehydration of food and, as I've mentioned before, home canning. If you're going to be growing a garden big enough to provide food to sustain your family, over a period of time, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to preserve it. And so that food dehydration is very easy. Home canning almost always gives excellent results, but you do have to do it safely. It's a little bit more involved than just dehydrating. And finally, if you have decided, I am going to make my pasta sauce from scratch, no more of this Hunt's or Prego or Ragu. We're done with that, family. All right. Now you have to determine which ingredients you're going to stock up on. And that's not the end of the world. It's not terribly difficult, but also it's more involved than just grabbing a can opener. So what role does canned food play in food storage? I think that is a decision that every mom, every individual and family will just have to decide. I think that it's okay to have some cans of tuna. I think it's okay to have some cans of Spam. I don't eat this personally, but my husband grew up eating this. So we have, a few cases of Spam. And here you go, the lowly canned bean. And I'm going to stick with my canned beans until they run out. So I do think that canned food does have a place in food storage, but I also think it would be a really smart move to start limiting the amount of canned food you store if you have another way to provide those foods in a different format. And by the way, one piece of good news is that Kroger's recently decided to do away with BPA in the processing of their own private label food. And here is something for anyone who believes that the government is on our side and we can depend on the government to watch out for us. For quite a while, the FDA's official position was that it shared the concern about the use of BPA. And yet, in the spring of 2012, it declined to prohibit food manufacturers from using BPA, claiming there just wasn't enough scientific evidence. So those are my thoughts on the use of canned food, the use of BPA in cans, as well as what direction to go with your food storage. So I'm Lisa Bedford. I'm the Survival Mom, and it is my pleasure just to share information and tips with you. I can be found on my blog, thesurvivalmom.com, as well as on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for your time. I'll see you next time around.